Morning, happy Tuesday, happy book review day. Today's book is Trust by Hernan Diaz. Picked it up at Comma Bookstore up in Linden Hills. Cool little store, had a nice chat with Victoria, and she said they had used this as kind of a book club event. Um, and won the Pulitzer Prize, so it probably doesn't really need my promotion. But I thought I would do something a little different with this one as a former English instructor, I often read books and think of them in conversation with one another. I almost always am building kind of classes in my head around the other books I'd pair with it and kind of what I don't know what kind of conversation I want the authors to have. So I'm wildly unfamiliar with Hernan Diaz's work. Unfortunately, this is really the first one I've read. If you just very briefly, it's broken into four parts. The first part is a novel, which is a fictionalized account of the nonfiction fiction that you get later. And so the names are changed, but the storyline is essentially the same. The next part then is the attempt at a memoir or autobiography of the male character in the novel, and then you get a memoir from his secretary who writes about her experience, and then at the very end you get the wife's perspective um, that reveals things that were kept secret in the previous parts. It's on one level, it's all about finance. It takes place in kind of between the 1880s and 1940s because you trace the family lineage back a little ways. And the family has a bunch of money, and investing plays a huge part in it. Um, it just so happens that I had recently read this book, The Panic of 1907, by Robert Brunner and Sean Carr. Um, and that panic plays a big role in this book, which is weird. I didn't intend it that way, but because I had read it, it really was interesting because I could see how much research Hernan Diaz had done to make this stuff accurate. Um, One thing that the Panic in 1907 book does is it does a really nice job of contextualizing what the panic was, what came before it, what came after it, and then also talks about why it's relevant today. Like why should we care about these things from the past? And so, if I were building a class, we would probably read sections of this, maybe. Um, I don't know that I would assign the whole book, but it would definitely inform a nice historical basis for this. Um, the other part that is, I think, interesting in terms of thinking about what would go well with trust is another book that talks about silences. So, even though the book Trust is about finance and husband wife relationship and society and those kind of things, um, what I found most interesting were kind of the gaps in the story. Um, the fictionalized, the novel piece of this, um, is obviously distant from the memoir pieces. But then even when you get into parts of the husband's memoir, there's literal gaps. It's sketched in. It's like, oh, talk about mother here, and philosophic treatment. And so there's literal gaps and silences where he doesn't fill in the full story for you. And similarly, when we get to the memoir of his secretary assistant, she leaves pieces out but makes connections that he didn't. And then when we get to the wife's account, you get all of these other things that have been silenced from before. And one of the books that I think does a really good job talking about silences is another Diaz, Junot Diaz, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Um, this one, it's kind of interesting, and Junot Diaz has gone on record talking about how important silences are. That a lot of times when you have a narrator or a character giving lots of information, you should pay attention to what they're not saying. That sometimes by being so forthcoming about some stuff means you're leaving a lot of other things out. And then lastly is this little book by Louise Erdrich, Shadow Tag, which I don't know anybody who's read this. I mean, I've encouraged a couple of people to read it, and we've had some conversations, but like it's such a weird book, but it would work in this context because the premise of Shadow Tag is that the wife, and I don't remember her name unfortunately, keeps a diary, and the husband doesn't know what's going on, so he's reading her diary, but she knows he's reading her diary. So she keeps two diaries. One's in a safe deposit box, and one is one where she manipulates what is actually happening in her life, so that she can kind of verify if he's snooping or not. And so it's all about secrets and silence and who you trust. So the trust in this one works neatly because of trust and money, but also like who's the reliable narrator here? Who is which story is true? Who do you believe and kind of why? So um, anyway, that is kind of a weird roundabout review, I guess, of Hernan Diaz's Trust. But I think it would work really good in conjunction with the Shadow Tag and Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, or you could use um, any number of his other books as well. So, and then Panic as well, perhaps. So, anyway, what are you reading? And when you read a book like this, I'm curious, like, do you see it in conversation with other books you've read, or how do you approach that? Have a good one.